You know, Mike, Jason Flom is a force of nature. He is a co-founder and CEO of Lava Media, Lava for Good. He was the chairman and CEO of Atlantic Records, Virgin Records, Capitol Music Group, and is responsible for launching countless superstars like Katy Perry, Lorde, Stone Temple Pilots, and Greta Van Fleet.
Right. But while that is impressive, and it is very impressive, by the way, it's not necessarily surprising. But he is much more than that. He is a philanthropist, a criminal justice expert, a public speaker, and author. He is a founding board member of the Innocence Project and serves on the boards of numerous criminal justice reform organizations. He hosts the Wrongful Conviction podcast and is the executive producer of the hit Bone Valley podcast.
I had the pleasure of sitting down with Jason recently to discuss his career and some important projects and causes he's currently working on that are literally life-changing. He also shared some great stories, like the one where his father brought home a box of records from Atlantic Records co-founder Ahmet Erdogan that really started it all. He also shared a memorable encounter with AC/DC where he met the band and received guitar lessons from Angus Young.
So now, without further ado, here's a very special bonus episode of the Your Morning Coffee podcast, a conversation with Jason Flom. Let's let it roll.
Stand by for transmission.
This is London calling.
Wake up! The revolution is at hand!
Your morning coffee is on the air. On the air. On the air. On the air. On the air.
Standing by.
Your morning coffee, the weekly music news for the new music business. It's the highly curated, agitated, advocated, moderated, and liberated digital music information that you need to know. We are your digital music authority. And now from our studios in Hollywood, California, here's your hosts, Jay Gilbert and Mike Etchart.
Jason Flom, thank you so much for joining me today. Good to see you.
Dude, I'm excited. Nice wall you got back there, by the way. I know we're on the radio, the headsets of everyone, so you can't see it, but he's got some pretty freaking cool platinum records behind him right there.
Yeah, not as many as you have, but I got a few memories. I'd like to kick this off with, you're a music fan, first and foremost. What were some of those first records that you fell in love with when you were young?
Well, this is, I don't know how this is going to resonate or not, but the first album I ever got was More of the Monkees.
Oh, nice.
And yeah, my sister bought it for me, and my older sister, and I loved it. Until I found out that you weren't supposed to love the Monkees, that the Beatles were the cool band to love.
Right.
And so the next record I got was Meet the Beatles, I think. No, it was Help.
Ah,
yeah.
So good.
I remember I went to this store in New York City. It was sort of an upscale type of record store. The experience was kind of weird. It was the first record store I'd been to. But it was like one of those ones where they sell some books and stuff too. But it was the one near my house. And I bought Help. I remember I was a little confused because there was some orchestral songs on there, and I was like, "This is not really what I bargained for." But
right.
But More of the Monkees. Monkees were one of the most underrated bands of all time, I think.
My gosh,
those songs were great.
Oh yeah, I mean they had so many great songwriters working with them, and so many great songs. And yeah, they were sort of manufactured, but those were great songs.
Yeah, it doesn't matter, manufacturer. I mean, I'm one of those guys that says, you know what? If the music's good, then. And maybe this is going to sound anathema to some of your hardcore listeners, but I feel like if the music's good and it's enjoyable, then, that's paramount in the whole equation, and then, of course I respect the craftsmanship, the princes of the world. There's only one prince, but someone who does everything and is a musical genius, that's great. But it doesn't invalidate the enjoyment that many people got from listening to records that were made by a lot of people.
Yeah,
you know,
100%. Last Train to Clarksville. So did you buy 45s back then? Or did you just go straight to the album?
I actually still have my collection of 45s, but I started off buying albums, and there's actually a pretty funny story. I don't know if I've ever told this story publicly, but when I was 15 or so, I loved rock and roll. I loved records. There was no music in my house. Growing up, nobody in my family played. We had a record player. I don't think anybody ever used it. Maybe once to play like a classical record or a jazz record. I don't know, but never. There's no music. But I loved music. And of course, I grew up in the era where you could go to Madison Square Garden at least once a week and see a true genius. And I did, right? I saw Zeppelin twice on the Summer Remains the Same tour. I saw the Stones. I saw Queen. I saw the Another One Bites the Dust tour there. I saw Sly Stone get married on stage when I was like 13 at the Garden. Stevie Wonder. I would go see Jethro Tull and Aerosmith. And like, it was ridiculous.
Crazy.
I mean, we can go on and on. So when I was around 15, I had probably a record collection of around 100 records by now. I had this little Panasonic record player that had, it was like a suitcase. You could carry it. It had two speakers that would latch on and fold on top, and then you could carry the little, and then what I would do is I would take each speaker and I'd put them on the table. I had an orange Formica table, and I would put my head down with my face in between them and turn it up as loud as I could and play, whatever record I loved the most. Because that was before I had headphones. Once I got headphones, I'd forget it. But so one night, my dad, who was, a corporate lawyer, he had nothing to do with music or anything like it. He comes home with a box of records from Atlantic Records. Now, a box was 25 records, for those of you who don't remember. And in it was Goat's Head Soup,
Stones.
Killing Me Softly, Roberta Flack, James Gang Bang, Houses of the Holy, Bad Company, I forgot which one, Straight Shooter, I think. Like this was, and there was 25 records, and 15 of them were magical. I don't remember, right? A lot of them were magical. And I later found out the backstory of how he came to come home with those records, which was that Ahmet Ertegun, the legendary founder of Atlantic Records, right? Some people say the greatest record man who ever lived. In fact, Mo Austin told me that no less than Mo Austin, the legend of legends himself, told me that Ahmet was the greatest of all time. And Mo was a very humble guy, so whatever, doesn't matter. Ahmet certainly was, one of a kind. Yeah. That being said, apparently what had happened was Ahmet had called my dad and said, Joe, I need your help with a case I've got, and my lawyers are stumped and they don't know what to do. And, some legal situation he had at the time. And my dad said, well, I don't work for individuals. And they didn't know each other at the time, only by reputation. And so he said, but tell me what's going on. And so apparently, and again, this is transliterated over the years, but apparently Ahmet told him whatever the situation was. Maybe it was related to the Cosmos, the soccer team he owned. I don't know what it was. And my dad said, well, why don't you ask your lawyers to try this approach, such and such, whatever the hell he came up with out of thin air. Because my dad was a wizard when it came to that stuff. And apparently it worked. So Ahmet calls him up and says, can I pay it? He says, no, just send my kid some records. So he came home with this box of records. And from that day forward, I really felt like Atlantic, it was etched into my soul, that A with the little like pinwheel thing and the red, green, and whatever the colors were on the label. I think it was black. And it was just so
iconic.
The iconic logo. So, from that day forward, I really felt like Atlantic was, was the label.
Yeah.
Right?
Sort of still is. Tell me about your start in the music business. We'll get into some other things that you're working on that are really interesting, but you've succeeded in a business with a tremendously high failure rate, not just for artists, but for executives too. And you've had a long career. How did you start that career?
Combination of luck, timing, serendipity, whatever you want to call it. But basically, I had wanted to be a rock star, and I had a tremendous ability to grow hair. I still have, as you can see, a lot of hair, but I had hair that was prodigious. I mean, it was
Epic.
It was all the way around my head. Like, it was so thick that in the summer I couldn't see a thing except through a small slot in the front of my head. And I had to turn left to see right because I would have to peer through that with one eye through the hole in my hair. And which was crazy because I was smoking pot all day. It's a miracle I didn't set myself totally on fire instead of just singeing hairs
Right.
occasionally. But, and so, I was a I guess I did my best to look like a rock star, but I never had the talent. I mean, I tried and I tried and I wrote songs and I played in bands. And we played some clubs. I got so far as getting my song on WNEW in New York, which was the rock station. And they had a show called Prisoners of Rock, ironically, considering my life now with helping people get out of prison.
Right.
But that was that was a big moment for me when they actually played our song. I think it was called War Jam. And so anyway, so that was as far as I got, but I didn't want to go to college. I had been this fantastic student until 8th grade when I started playing guitar and smoking weed. And then soon after that, I started going to the racetrack, and I really was a misfit kid. So I didn't want to go to college. And one day my dad came to my room and said, I got a deal for you. I said, what? He says, you got a year to become a rock star. Otherwise, you got to go to college. And I was like, great. I don't even need a whole year. I had chutzpah, right? I had no lack of confidence, even though the evidence wasn't there. But so he went back and told my mom about this great deal that he made with his fucked up son and with their fucked up son. And my mom, who had never cursed in her life until that day, apparently said, bullshit. If he's going to live in my house, he's going to have to work or go to school. No exceptions. So now my dad, arguably the greatest negotiator of the 20th century, had to come back to my room to undo the deal he just did with his fucked up son. And so he made a call to his friend, Arthur Lyman, who the great civil rights attorney of the day. And Arthur got me an interview because he said, Arthur, what do I do? I got to get this kid a job, so because I had this year that I had to work. And so he arranged an interview for me at Warner Communications, which owned Atlantic Records, but I didn't know that at the time. And I still remember I smoked a couple of joints like I always did. I walked in there, I slumped down in the chair. I think I had a button-down shirt on had paint on it. I can't remember why. And they took one look at me. This guy took one look at me and said, you're going to work at Atlantic Records. I was like, oh, okay, great. Never even occurred to me that Atlantic Records was a place. I thought it was just like this mythical thing where elves made these records and like these bands I thought it was like osmosis or alchemy. I didn't know what the hell, how this thing happened. But so I went there, they gave me a staple gun, some double-sided tape and a bunch of Led Zeppelin posters and Chic and Sister Sledge and Stones. And I was walking around to record stores and putting up posters, climbing on ladders with double-sided tape and, like I said, a staple gun. And I fell in love with the music business.
You must have felt like you won the lottery.
It was unbelievable. I'm telling you, Jay. It was $4 an hour and all the free records you wanted to take home with you. And here's a story for the ages. You ready? Yeah. So I find a record, a 45 in the hallway. It was being thrown out. There was Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap back with, on the other side, I think it had the Jack. And I had never heard AC/DC before. They weren't a thing at the time, right? They had 4 albums out, but no, 3. Well, yeah, they had, including Dirty Deeds, which was still only on import. But they had, they had made other albums. They had made Let There Be Rock and Power Rage and High Voltage, but nobody cared. And so I found this single in the hallway. It looked like something I wanted to listen to. I go home and I listen to it. I was like, oh my God, this is incredible. What the hell is this? And then, of course, I fell in love with AC/DC. And all I wanted to do was listen to AC/DC all day long. And that's all I did was listen to AC/DC all day long. Because it was like I had found the lost treasure of Sierra Madre, right? It was like, what is this? This is unbelievable, right? I knew every Aerosmith song back inside out from all 4 of the first 4 albums, which to me was their greatest albums. I knew every Zeppelin song. I knew all, I knew these things. I knew every Bob Dylan song. But now I had this a whole new thing to learn, and so then Highway to Hell comes out, and it goes, I go crazy. I'm running around putting up posters. I made up my own posters to put in the record store that said, give your friends hell for Christmas. I remember I got in trouble because it was too close to the St. Patrick's Cathedral, where I put it in the record store in Sam Goody. And I had a stand-up of Angus Young. It was like a cardboard cutout of Angus Young. And I put Christmas lights, like red ones through his eyes and yellow ones through the guitar and the green ones around his tie.
Nice.
And it was like, I was just going nuts. And the record went gold. And one day I was told by this woman who ran our publicity department, her name was Simo Doe, and great name. Mm-hmm. And she,
yeah.
So she told me, she knew how much I loved AC/DC. So she goes, Jason, she had a very soft voice. She goes, Jason, AC/DC is going to be in the office today. I'm like, what? And we were on the second floor at 75 Rock in those days. And I said, where? And she goes, they're going to be up on the 30th floor at corporate. They're going to give them like a little gold record thing and everything up at the corporate offices on 30th floor. So I'm like, fuck that. I'm going up there, right? So you got to picture this. I'm 18, 19 years old. I go up to the 30th floor. They're not letting me in there. Of course not, right? Nowhere near. So I said, fuck it. I'll just wait on the second floor and see if they come back down here. So I waited in the reception area. And sure enough, the 5 of them come out of the elevator. And Phil Rudd was holding, they had given him a cake, and he was holding out a little box. It was pretty flat, the box. I guess it was a big cake. Maybe it was shaped like a record or whatever it was, right? And so he puts it on the receptionist's desk. He's like, hey, I'm a pizza delivery guy. Who's going to pay for these pizzas? I got some pizzas here, right? And the other guys are walking in. They're all about 5'4", right? They're all this one walking in. And so I decided to follow Bon. So I follow Bon Scott into the hallway. And I go, hey, Bon, I've always wanted to meet you. Like, I always wondered what it'd be like to talk to you. Like, you sing so cool, but like, what? I never knew what your voice was like. Because there was no interviews or anything, right? And he goes, yeah, he says, a lot of people think I sing like this. He's holding his nose. And he goes, by the way, I've got a cocaine nose and no cocaine. You got any? And I'm like, no, but I got some weed in my office. You want some weed? He's like, hey, come on, mate, let's go. So he comes. I had a tiny little office back then before they had the good idea to take it away from me. And in there, I had a Power Rage poster on the wall. I had my SG Standard, which was a guitar I played with the same guitars and I had my demo tape from my band. So I gave him my demo tape. I gave him whatever weed I had, and we move on. And then I'm, just tripping from this experience. And then an hour later, I'm walking down the hallway and I see Angus, Bon, and Malcolm standing outside this guy's office. The door was closed. It was a guy named Rafael Torres who ran our dance music department. And they're banging on the door. And I'm just sort of staying out of the way. And I hear Bon going, hey, is Jason in there? Hey, is Jason in there? And I'm like, and it wasn't a common name back then, Jason, right? And so I'm like, you looking for me? And he's like, hey, look at that fucking guy right here. Gave me his demo tape. Oh, his guitar in his office. And I'm like, and so Angus and Malcolm literally follow me down the hall into my little office. And Malcolm takes a look around and leaves. And Angus plops down on the couch and picks up the guitar and starts playing. And I'm sitting there asking him questions like, just whatever I can think of. And I'll never forget, I said, Angus, you're so young, because he was, and you're so great. Like, when did you take up playing the guitar seriously? And he goes, I never took it up seriously. I'm like, oh, fuck. And he literally, Jay, gave me a guitar lesson in my office. He taught me how to play Kicked in the Teeth and Riff Raff.
Wow.
And from that point forward, my first platinum record was actually AC/DC Highway to Hell, because I designed an ad, which I still have, autographed by all the guys in my house. It said, the Highway to Hell is paved with platinum. And so I conceived and designed that ad, based on the old Aerosmith ads that I loved so much.
Yeah.
Which you probably remember, right? That were the coolest ads ever. So the coolest one being the Toys in the Attic ad. Remember that?
Yeah, I do.
It was an elephant standing, his front hooves were, or whatever they call those, were on, his pads were on 2 Tonka trucks, which were Tonka trucks were like the indestructible toys back then. And he's standing on these 2 Tonka trucks, and the ad just said "Toys built to last, Aerosmith, Toys in the Attic, double platinum." And I was like, that's the baddest ass shit I've ever seen. So that was what gave me the idea.
Well played.
So that's what it was like in Atlantic in the early days.
Well played, sir. I want to get into Lava for Good, and some of these things are so great. But I want to sort of back up a little bit and talk a little bit about the larger Lava Media Group to give folks sort of some context in, what's under that umbrella.
Yeah, great. And thanks for asking. So Lava Media, originally I founded Lava Records under the Atlantic banner, which was a great time because from a standing start with, 3 employees and no artists and a small budget, we sold almost 100 million albums in 8 years.
Unreal.
It was those days, it was Matchbox 20 and Kid Rock and the Corrs, Simple Plan,
Yep.
Trans-Siberian Orchestra, Edwin McCain. I mean, it was incredible times, and Uncle Kracker, et cetera. And so it was really, it was just, it was a lot of fun. And I always loved signing bands that nobody else liked, for some reason. And to this day, I seem to have a knack for sort of those needle in the haystack artists, which is great because now in the new Lava world, Lava 2.0, whatever you want to call it, I'm partners with I think the 2 best record men of the last generation, which is Monty and Avery Lippman. And those guys are like scientists, I mean, they love music, don't get me wrong, but they have really not only perfected the art of recognizing these sparks that these records shoot off. Avery says when as soon as a record leaves the building, it starts talking to us, right? Because the public, they're the ones that make the decisions ultimately. They know what they like.
Right.
But they've also, I think what's underrated about those 2 guys is they're the best deal makers as well. They have been the most creative deal makers in the business, going back to when they signed Jack Johnson, or even they beat me out for Chumbawamba back in the day. We were the only ones that wanted to sign Chumbawamba, them and Lava the first time. So it's a good partnership because I find these needles in a haystack that don't really make any sense. And they find these, sort of glowing orbs, and then take those and turn them into the biggest artists in the world and keep them there, which is another amazing art form. You notice, like with Republic, the artists that they signed, the big ones, they stay big. And that's crazy because so many artists, as we know, reach the pinnacle and then they fade. And I've had those experiences myself, and it's painful. But so Lava Media these days, in partnership with Republic on the record side, and Primary Wave is our partner on podcasts, and they participate with us on the music side as well. They've been great partners as well. But so Lava now, it's been a good run with Republic, to say the least, with Lord and Jessie J and Greta Van Fleet more recently. Now we have The Warning, who are literally like, watch the next year. And they used to have that Hollywood stock market where you could bet on the success. Like, put your money on The Warning, because this thing is going to go nuts. 12 months from now, you'll be like, Flom, you told me so.
All right.
And so it's really exciting. It's still exciting to see, and they're so young, they're so gifted as musicians, and it's so great to see, a female rock band, that really does it, like really, they can play, they can sing, and it's legit. So and fans are really picking up on it. So I think they're destined to be the biggest female rock band of all time, and it's right at that really fun phase where it's bubbling. So so The Warning, we have now we also have an exciting young band named Return to Dust, another rock band. So we become sort of this sort of rock label. We even have a young pop artist named Hayden Henderson, which is Haiden Henderson, who I think is going to be, everything takes so long these days, but he's percolating. I mean, he's so smart. He's got a great story too. This kid, Hayden Henderson. So it's Haiden Henderson. And get this, Jay. So you've never heard this story before. So Hayden's mother was a narcotics cop and his father was a drug addict. So he grew up visiting his father in prison, ends up, becoming a brief stint as a model, won a golden ticket on Idol. Then he decides to study aerospace engineering at USC, living in his car, studying aerospace engineering. and COVID hits. So no classes. So he starts making videos because he's a terrific guitar player and starts making videos. They go viral. My son discovers him, Michael Flom, who has a little company he started called Flom, which I'm like, why you call it Flom? He goes, for love of music, Dad. I'm like, oh, yeah.
Nice.
How about it? Like, I'm like, how did I not know that? Like, dude, come on, it's perfect. So he's managing some great young producers and artists of his own, but he discovered Hayden and we signed him, and he's at that good phase now. He's got like 1 million monthly listeners. His videos are growing. All the metrics are up last year, 300 to 400%.
Nice.
And he's touring constantly. You know, he's just the type of artist you want to see win. He's such a great kid. He's so obviously. I'm sitting here saying he's smart. I'm a college dropout. Kid was studying aerospace engineering. I'm like, I don't even know what that is. So anyway, I have a vague idea. So I'm very excited about the next phase of Lava. You know, I think it was Avery who said to me, several years ago, you guys should really own the rock space. And it's tricky because rock bands don't stream as much as other forms of music do, but they sell a lot of albums, and we're going to find a way because I love the experience with Greta in the early days, having signed them, of watching kids have a taste of the experience that I had as a young kid growing up watching these bands doing it like they do it, like with the incredible vocalist and incredible guitar player and, four guys just, no frills, like, let's go.
Yeah.
So
love that.
So that's the music side. And then Lava Media, because you asked, Lava Media encompasses the podcasting company, which is called Lava for Good.
Yeah.
I started a podcast in 2016 called Wrongful Conviction, based on the experience I had by then of over 20 years of working to free people who shouldn't be in prison.
Yeah.
And by that, I mean not just innocent people, but also people who were sentenced to draconian sentences for things that I used to do as a kid, like pot and things like that,
Nonviolent.
Yeah, I mean, and even people, violent is a tricky thing because some things get grouped in as violent when they shouldn't be. I mean, domestic abuse survivors get called violent criminals because they fought back against the person that was abusing them, their partner or whatever. So yeah, I'm careful with those designations, but certainly, there are people who are violent people, and that are dangerous. I'm not discounting that.
Sure.
But anyway, my work is primarily focused on, as you said, nonviolent drug offenders and people who are factually innocent, who are almost all of them convicted of violent crimes like murder.
Yeah.
But didn't do the crime and weren't there and didn't know about it and didn't plan it and didn't have anything to do with it. They had the same amount to do with it as you did or whoever's listening.
Well, let's talk about that, Jason, because that's super interesting. I mean, first of all, I've listened to your podcast, and the first thing I'll say is that they're riveting, but they're also really high production value. I mean, they are just professionally done, edited. They're very compelling. But let's back up just a little bit. I was reading an article about how you started some of this, and it was a letter from Stephen Lennon. And I would love for you to sort of back up and sort of talk about how you were pulled into this justice area.
Yeah, well, that's good research there because it's really, again, it's this very serendipitous type of a story. The fact is that 32 years ago, which is half a lifetime because I'm 64, unabashedly 64, I was just on my way to somewhere and jumping in a taxi and was looking for a newspaper, and the only one they had at this particular newsstand was the Post, which is not a paper I ever read and should never read. Hopefully no one ever reads, but that's beside the point. But for some reason that day I was meant to read it. So there it was, I picked it up, and a story caught my eye about this kid, Stephen Lennon, who was serving 15 years to life for a nonviolent first offense cocaine possession charge in a maximum security prison in New York State. And in case you thought you didn't hear me correctly, that was a nonviolent first offense drug possession charge. It was cocaine. And he was 32 at the time of this publication. He had been in prison for 8 years. He had gotten college degrees and all sorts of other good things he had done in prison. I was 32. He was 32. He had been in prison for 8 years. I had been sober for almost that long at this point in time because I had gone to rehab. And I realized very quickly that our roles could have been reversed, right? I'm an atheist, but there but for the grace of God goes I. So, so I'm like, this doesn't make any logical sense. The reason it was in the paper was because his mother, Shirley, had been appealing for clemency from Governor Mario Cuomo, and had been turned down, even though she got support from the sentencing judge, the warden, and even Geraldine Ferraro, who many of your listeners will be too young to remember, but she was the first woman to ever receive a nomination to be vice president from a major political party in the United States. And her own son had problems with coke, and to her credit, she decided to try to help this kid. Her son, of course, got sentenced to house arrest. So, like I said, I just felt like I had to do something. And so I called Mrs. Lennon on the phone. She was in Rome, New York, in the phone book, and I offered my help. And she said that they had exhausted all her. I offered to send money. I didn't have a lot of money back then, but I said, whatever I got, you can have. You got to hire a lawyer. You got to do something. This can't be. And she was very sweet, but she said they'd they exhausted all their appeals, and I just was like, I got to do something. So I called the only criminal defense lawyer I knew at the time. Now I know hundreds. And I called this guy, Bob Kalina, because he represented two of the artists I had signed, Stone Temple Pilots and Skid Row. And as you remember, they were getting arrested like weekly back then. So one or the other of them. So I had Bob on speed dial. So I called Bob. I said, Bob, I told him about the story. And I said, what can be done? And he said, nothing. Nothing you can do. And he says, the Rockefeller drug laws, there's thousands of stories like this. I go, well, we got to do something. So he came to my office and he spoke to Shirley on the phone, the mom. And then he said, all right, look, as a favor to you, I'll read the transcripts of the trial. So he read the transcripts. He calls me up a month later and he says, you know what? I'll take the case pro bono. I need to do some pro bono work anyway. And 6 months later, we end up in a courtroom in Malone, New York. And they bring this kid in shackles, right? Like he's Charles Manson or something, right? And he's got his legs chained together. His hands are chained to his waist. I still remember for some reason him trying to adjust his glasses, and he couldn't really get his hands up high enough. So he had to I was like, it seems like a little bit overkill, no? I mean, the guy's a nonviolent first time. Anyway, so the judge was this old guy with white hair. He looked like Ted Forsyth. I'm like, this is not going to go well. I couldn't imagine it would go well. Now, bear in mind, this is 93, right? I saw 93. So I still had a mullet. I mean, this is how long ago it was, right? And purple Doc Martens on. And there I was in the courtroom, and the argument's going back and forth, and I'm holding Mrs. Lennon's hand, and her husband stands on the other side, and there's not a lot of other people in the courtroom. And the judge bangs the gavel down and says the motion is granted. And I'm like, what? And then Bob, in his three-piece suit, comes sort of scurrying over, and I'm like, Bob, what happened? And he goes, we won. And I'm like, we what? He goes, we won. And I'm like, holy fuck, that's amazing. So Stephen was freed. He still had 6 years left to go before he would have been eligible for parole. And, it was the most amazing experience. It was it was like a lightning bolt hit me. And I was like, oh my God, I guess I have a superpower. Like I didn't know I had, but if I got it, I'm going to use it to the best of my ability. So that led me to learn more about the issue. Rolling Stone magazine has been a great source they've done great journalism on this topic for a long, long time. They still do. And so I read a story about the Grateful Dead stings as the music business comes back into play again. The DEA was conducting these raids or stings at Grateful Dead shows where they would put in undercover who looked like a deadhead who would, convince some hapless kid to sell him a little bit of LSD, and then the kid would get locked up for 10 years or more. And so in this article, I mentioned this organization called Families Against Mandatory Minimums, which had just started to combat this scourge. And so I joined their board. I became the first board member there. They're still a great organization, FAMM.org, if you want to look it up. And then soon after that, I learned about the work of the Innocence Project through something I saw on TV about a case of a guy who was scheduled to be executed. And these two brilliant young lawyers, Peter Neufeld and Barry Scheck, had come along with their microscopes and their science and their DNA, and they found this evidence that this guy was actually innocent, and they had gotten him not only not executed but freed. And there was this TV show about it, and I was like, oh my God, that's crazy. That's the craziest thing I've heard yet. Like, I didn't know that we execute innocent people in this country. Now, of course, I know it all too well, and we do it day in and day out. But I was like, I got to work on this, you know. So I marched into their office. I maybe unannounced. I don't even remember. That there really wasn't anybody there to stop me in those days. It was just two guys, and maybe there was a receptionist, maybe not. I don't know. And I always say it was these two guys with a briefcase, a microscope, a phone, and a dream. And I was on a bunch of law books. And I was like, I'm not a lawyer, but I'll do whatever you want me to do. I got to work on this stuff. And so I became the first board member, myself and another guy named Jack Taylor were the original board members there. And then that became such a huge part of my life. And so I started the podcast to try to help change hearts and minds by interviewing people who were wrongfully convicted. Sometimes I do the interviews in prison. I go into these maximum security prisons and do the interviews in person when I can. Other times it's over the phone. Some people we interview have already been freed after serving 10, 20, 48 years, like insane stuff. And so...
And that's the Wrongful Conviction podcast?
That's the Wrongful Conviction podcast, yeah.
Because you do the War on Drugs podcast and the Bone Valley podcast, and I would love to learn more about those as well.
Yeah, so Wrongful Conviction, take a moment now and get that on your phones, because I promise you each story, it's only about 45 minutes each episode or 40 minutes, and each story it'll anger you, it'll terrify you, and it'll inspire you, because ultimately these people are the most courageous, beautiful, kind, forgiving people that you could ever imagine. And speaking of which, today we launched our second season of Bone Valley, which is, I see you with your fist in the air. Yeah, Jay, that's Jay's favorite, I guess. And it's really a beautiful podcast. I don't host it. I was one of the producers of it, but it's hosted by Gilbert King, who is a Pulitzer Prize-winning author who wrote Devil in the Grove and other great books. And in it, he profiles the story of Leo Schofield, who was in prison for 36 years. He was in prison when we made the podcast, the first season, and the podcast led to him being freed. He had, I don't think there was ever any mystery as to the fact that he was innocent of the murder of his young wife. She was 18, he was 21 at the time, and he was an aspiring rock star of all things. Played in a metal band down in Florida, and she was tragically murdered by a guy named Jeremy Scott. And, in the first season of Bone Valley, Jeremy confesses on our podcast. And in this new season that just really launched literally today, with a huge amount of fanfare, as you can imagine, there's some incredible moments, but among other things, you will hear the first phone call between Jeremy in prison for another murder and Leo, in which Leo forgives him from the bottom of his heart for murdering his wife and putting him in prison for 36 years, which is longer than many of your listeners have been alive. Or even if you're somebody who's older, think about the last 36 years of your life and imagine spending that, or the 36 years from the time you were 21 to 57. Think about all those experiences you had, all the time the hits, the misses, the broken hearts, the everything.
I can't imagine.
The having kids, having a family, all that stuff. He's deprived of all of that stuff and put in the most, draconian situation you can imagine. It's just, a maximum security prison. A maximum security prison in Florida is no place even for a guilty person. Although some people would say, fuck them if they're guilty, I don't care. But, I think we really need a whole different approach to crime and punishment in this country. But for an innocent person, it's insane. So Bone Valley just came out today. We have these, on our slate, Lava for Good. And you can go on Apple or Spotify and subscribe to Lava for Good and get all this stuff ad-free and early. And it's cheap, too. So it's $3 a month or whatever it is. Our other podcast, which I'm really proud of, The War on Drugs, is one where season 1, we took a look at the history of the war on drugs. Not the band, but the war itself, which of course never was a war on drugs. It was a war on people. And it was all just marketing, and, now it's been, acknowledged by people that worked directly under him that Nixon, sort of created this war on drugs because he wanted a war on black people and hippies, but he couldn't call it that. So he cleverly called it the war on drugs instead, or deviously, I should say.
Jason, there's a quote, and I don't know if this is from you, but I saw when I first listened to that podcast, I saw this quote: "You can't incarcerate your way out of addiction." I thought that was pretty profound.
It's so true. And there's a quote that goes with that from my friend Anthony Papa, who did 12 years in maximum security in New York for just, he was a guy who was hard on his luck when a bowling buddy asked him if he could just deliver a package from one place to another, got on a bus, and it was a sting. And there were cops waiting on the other side of the bus for him. And he says, if you can't control the flow of drugs in a maximum security prison, how can you possibly hope to control them in a free society? So they work together, those quotes, and you're absolutely right. You can't interdict your way out of drugs, and you can't incarcerate your way out of drugs. What you can do, there's a wonderful, I think this really encapsulates the whole thing. There's an amazing experiment that was done, I think, 50 years ago, right? Where for the longest time, everyone clung to this belief that people, if you make drugs available to them, they'll just become addicted and everything will turn to shit, right? And there was a famous experiment where somebody put a rat in a cage with bright lights, and they put 2 spigots. One of them had water, and one of them had water that had a mixture, I think, of cocaine and heroin in it. And then they watched, and rat after rat went through this experiment and overdosed on the cocaine water. They always chose the cocaine heroin water, and then they would die within, a week or 2 weeks. And so people were like, see, obviously if you make this stuff available, people are going to abuse it and they're going to die. And then some guy came along and said, wait a minute. What kind of experiment is this? You're taking a rat, and rats are social animals, right? They all, they travel in groups, and they have a life, right? And for what it is, you might not like rats, they're not necessarily my favorite. I mean, I respect their right to be like all animals, but he said, you're taking a rat and you're putting it in an isolated environment with none of its friends, nothing to play with, nothing to do, nothing to climb on or do any of the things that rats do. And you're making it so desperate that, of course, it's doing this other. So let's try a different thing. He goes, let's create Rat Park. So he put these rats in a cage with the same 2 spigots, but they had stuff to do, and they had cheese, and they had whatever the hell they had in there, and other rats, and none of them chose the drug water. None. It was 0% because they didn't want it. But the thing is, if you make people miserable enough, they will turn to an escape. And of course, there's some people that are just naturally drawn to drugs. There's a percentage of people that are just naturally. But my whole philosophy when it comes to that stuff, and we're putting this out through our various podcasts, is that what causes crime, and maybe, and what causes addiction, I guess you could say too, is desperation. If you make people desperate enough, whether that's through mental health challenges that are untreated, or desperate poverty or other types of, desperation, they see no way forward. They see no light at the end of the tunnel, no crack in the door, nothing. Then eventually they'll do something. Everyone worries about shoplifting, which is a false flag. But the number one thing that's shoplifted in the United States is baby formula. Like, think about that. It's like because people want to feed their babies, right? And they don't have enough money. But okay, that aside. So what causes crime and to some extent addiction is desperation. It's more universally true, I think, with crime than it is with addiction. But what prevents it oftentimes is hope, right? If you give people a little, like with the rats, right? If you give people an alternative, and this is proven, this is not just hyperbole, right? It's been proven in experiment after experiment that if you go to the most crime-ridden areas and you put in a recreation space, or you put in an after-school thing, or you put in a taco stand, right, where people gather from the community and they meet each other and they learn that they have more in common than they have differences, or you fix the street lights, or you clean the garbage off the streets, crime goes down precipitously, because people feel less desperate and a little more hopeful, and they don't commit as many crimes. It's amazing. But instead, what do? We spend all the money on policing and prisons, and it doesn't work. It never worked. It's not going to work. But we cling to these failed approaches like the war on drugs. So the war on drugs, and then we have other podcasts. We have one I'm very proud of called Erased, The Murder of Elma Sands, which is a podcast my daughter created and narrates, which is now being adapted for TV. And it's a wonderful story. It's the story of the first murder trial in American history, and in which the guy who was actually guilty was very fortunate to have access to money and power, and so he hired for the defense Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr. Those were his lawyers, and it's really interesting because my daughter found the transcripts from the trial.
Wow.
And you learn that these guys they did not play by the rules. Let's just say that. They did everything they had to do to get their guilty client exonerated. And Allison Williams plays the best friend of the murder victim. And Tony Goldwyn plays Hamilton, and Barry Scheck plays Aaron Burr, and I'm the judge, which is really funny.
Nice. I can't wait to hear that one. And this is a good segue. That's your daughter, Allison, correct?
Right.
And you two wrote a children's book, Lulu is a Rhinoceros, and it's near and dear to my heart because my wife is a kindergarten teacher for the last 27 years. So I see a lot of kids' books, and that one I actually read it. It's very charming, and it's illustrated really well. And as a father of daughters, I can't imagine how much fun that must have been for you to do that project with Allison.
Yeah, Jay, it was amazing, and I wish everyone could have the type of experience that I had, because it's been really just a source of great joy. I had this idea to write a children's book. A lot of people have ideas to write children's books, and a lot of people do. But so nothing terribly unique about that. But I had this idea based on my love of rhinoceroses and the work I did in Africa with an organization called VetPaw, which is Veterans Empowered to Protect African Wildlife, who are saving rhinoceroses and using various ways, transporting them, protecting them, training African park rangers in the U.S. military tactics that they learned so that they can protect themselves from these poachers. And anyway, I got to be up close and personal with a rhinoceros and hug, or two actually, and hug and kiss them, and just
Amazing.
They were babies, but they're 1,000 and 2,000 pound babies, but they're like living dinosaurs. And so, and I loved dinosaurs as a kid. And so when I came back, I just thought, I was sitting on the couch with my bulldog Lulu, and I said, I was telling her about my trip, and I know everybody's rolling their eyes, but you talk to your dogs too. So
of course.
Anyway. I talk to my now we have a pit bull named Freddie Mercury. I talk to him all the time. But anyway, so I was talking to my daughter, to my bulldog Lulu, and I tell her about my trip, and she looks me in the eye and says, "Well, I'm a rhinoceros too." I said, "What are you talking about? You're obviously a dog. You're small and furry, and you're on my couch." And she looks at me and looks me right in the eye and says, "Can't you see? I have short legs, a big body, and a flat head. I only run fast for short distances, and I'm clumsy, and I burp and snore and fart like a rhino. I'm a rhino. I was like, all right, well then. So I called my daughter. I said, Allie, what if we could write a book and we could create a little hero for kids who feel left out, put down, or bullied because the way they look, the way they feel, or the way they are. She was like, let's go. So she studied creative writing. She actually teaches creative writing in prisons for the last many years, 7 or 8 years now. And so I was very lucky that she was an actual writer. And then I was also very lucky that I found this wonderful illustrator, Sophie Corrigan, who illustrated the book. And, now it's, we published it ourselves in 2018, and it's really had a nice impact. It's had an amazing impact on a lot of kids that we've had such wonderful feedback from parents and educators like your wife, and it's just been a source of great joy. And I'm not allowed to say which one yet, but next month it's going to be released as an animated TV special on one of the major streamers.
Wow,
So
congratulations. That's amazing.
yeah, it's super exciting and fun, and it's just something different. And the only thing I'll say about that is I encourage anyone who has some crazy idea like that one was. And even though I was 2018, so I was 55 when I decided to write. Oh no, I was 50. Well, how old am I? 64. Yeah, I was 57. So it's like, it's not too late. Like if you have some crazy thought or even like, and I even think this applies to the other side too, Jay, talking about the joy I get from helping people get out of prison. I said this at a commencement address I gave last year, like every number one record I've ever had, and I've been super lucky to work with so many amazing artists over the years. And a lot of the names, but for people who are listening, it ranges from all the way back to White Lion, and I talked about Skid Row and Stone Temple Pilots and Collective Soul and Tori Amos, and who's one of the ones I'm most proud of having discovered. And then even Paramore, and going forward, 30 Seconds to Mars. God, I can't remember. So many wonderful artists that I've been lucky to work with, Katy Perry, et cetera. But every number one record is an awesome experience. I don't take it lightly at all. But none of them compares with the feeling of walking somebody out of prison. It's a different thing. And I've had that experience many times now, and it's just that's I said to the kids when I gave this address, the first one is happiness, the second one is joy. And everyone should. I told the kids, you should find your happiness. Like whatever you meant to be going and doing, go and do that. This my dad told me. My dad, who was my hero, my mentor, said to my brother and I, he said, do whatever you want to do. Try to be the best at it, but just make the world a better place.
Wow.
That's the only definition of success that matters. And so I've been really, really blessed that I found something that I'm good at, which is, changing hearts and minds and helping people come home. And the podcast, the Wrongful Conviction podcast, has helped free. I think we just got some more good news on one of our cases yesterday. So I think we're up to like 30 people where it's been a part of the solution of bringing somebody home. Obviously, it always takes a village.
Yeah.
And the lawyers and others that, they deserve the lion's share of the credit, but the exposure really helps.
Yeah.
And so I encourage people to listen, because when you listen, you may even know something, but even if you don't, and of course that's a long shot, you may know someone. You may be able to write a letter, or or create an impact, or post, or do whatever you do about these cases, because some of them are going to really touch your heart. I guarantee it. And we've also been credited by politicians, legislators in 3 different states thus far that we know of, Washington State, Indiana, and Illinois, who have written bills that were signed into law because of something they heard on the podcast that made them want to make these changes. Like in Washington State, where this legislator, Strom Peterson, wrote a bill which made videotaping of interrogations mandatory in Washington State. Now, you say, what do you mean? They weren't?
Right.
No, they weren't. But now they are.
Crazy.
And then he and I got to meet him, and it was so nice that he cited the podcast as the inspiration for by the way,
amazing.
You see my shirt?
Yeah. Is that Muhammad Ali?
Yeah.
Standing over Frazier, maybe?
I think that's Liston.
Oh, is it Sonny Liston?
I think so,
Nice.
yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, and my crazy story with Muhammad Ali?
No,
He's my
Please.
father-in-law.
What?
Yeah. It's crazy. I know. It's insane. I mean, your reaction is my reaction every day. I wake up and I go, no, this cannot even be. Like his daughter Kalia is my wife. And
I did not know that. That's amazing.
yeah, so he is and I think I have such reverence for that man. I mean, most people think he's the greatest. I think many people, I don't know, a lot of people think he's the greatest athlete of all time. But I think that his legacy as a civil rights hero and a humanitarian, it far exceeds his footprint, his super large footprint as the consummate athlete that he was. So, yeah, I don't take that lightly.
Jason, it's been such a pleasure talking to you. Where can our listeners get involved? Where can they learn more about you and all the great work you're doing? How can they reach out?
Instagram is @It's Jason Flom, and I'm on TikTok as well. And those are probably the best ways to keep track of what's going on, because I post about this stuff all the time. And of course, follow the podcast, because that's the best way to learn. I mean, I make them so people can listen. Yeah. And, and it's really, I appreciate everybody who listens, because it's the only way we're going to be able to make change. I mean, listen, spread the word. And, and I appreciate you, Jay, for having me on here today. I mean, your podcast, it's funny, when I told people I was going to be on your podcast, people are like, yo, that's dope. Like, that's a good podcast. I was like, so you've got a little rep yourself there, boss, like literally like people say it in like hushed tones. Like that's a really,
Thank you.
I'm like, yeah. So that's,
well, coming from you, that's high praise, but I got to say the work that you're doing is just inspiring. And it's just been such an honor to talk to you. And I hope we can talk again, Jason. This has just been great.
Let's do it. Let's do dinner one night. I love it.
All right. Thanks, you so much, man. Take care. Keep up the great work.
I shall.
All right. Cheers.
You've been listening to Your Morning Coffee, the weekly music news program for the new music business. Join Jay Gilbert and Mike Etchart next time for the digital music news you need to know.